All right, this is the podcast for STEM Bio, Chapter 19, Section 2, which is on measuring populations. First thing we're going to talk about is population growth rate. Scientists who study population dynamics are called demographers, and they define the growth rate of a population as the amount by which a population size changes in a given time. Growth rate is dependent on four processes. Obviously, the number of people being born, birth, death, emigration, and immigration. Make sure you know the difference between those two terms. Emigration is the movement of individuals out of a population. Immigration is movement of individuals into a population. Another concept is per capita. Per capita just means per person. Birth rates, death rates, and growth rates for large populations are always expressed per capita, which means or by person. For example, if we have 52 births per 1,000 individuals, the birth rate would be 52 divided by 1,000, or 0.052 births per capita per year. If there was also 14 deaths per 1,000 individuals, the death rate would be 14 out of 1,000, or 0.014 deaths per capita per year. To calculate population growth rate, it would be birth rate minus death rate equals growth rate. So the population growth rate is birth rate minus death rate. So our birth rate in our example was 0.052. You would subtract the death rate of 0.014, and you would get 0.038 for the growth rate per capita. If the growth rate is positive, that means the population is growing. If it's negative, that means the population is shrinking. One model that we look at when we study populations is the exponential model. And the exponential model is exponential growth. It's basically the population is growing, increasing in size and in number, and the growth rate is steady. The exponential model describes perpetual growth at a steady rate in a population. So number of individuals is increasing over time in an exponential fashion. This graph represents the exponential model. We also call it the J-shaped curve because the curve is a J-shape. It leads us to predict that this population size will increase indefinitely. However, is that realistic? No. The exponential model does not apply to most populations because populations can't grow forever. There's going to be something that's going to limit the population size. Resources they depend on will become low, waste will accumulate. So there is a limiting factor or limiting resources that will restrain the growth of a population. And there's different things, different limiting factors, and this will limit all populations. So in reality, most populations have a logistic model. They follow this model. This is when the birth rates fall and death rates climb as a population gets high. When the carrying capacity is reached, which is represented as K on the graph, the number of individuals the environment can support is reached. That's the limit of the population. And so the population grows until it reaches that carrying capacity, and then it becomes stable. So instead of a J-shaped, it starts off J, but it turns into an S-shaped curve. And it assumes that carrying capacity is constant, but actually the carrying capacity does fluctuate a little bit. It's greater when there's more prey, for example. Let's watch this one.
In the logistic model, when population size is small, birth rates are high and death rates are low. Available resources allow the population to grow rapidly at very near the exponential rate. As the population size increases and resources become limited, the birth rate falls and the death rate increases. This results in a reduction in overall population growth rate. Carrying capacity is the maximum population size that a particular environment with limited resources can support. When the population size equals the carrying capacity, the birth rate equals the death rate, and growth stops.
So here's a picture of the two population growth models side by side. How is population size regulated? There's two different population limiting factors that we can discuss. The first one is density dependent factors. This is things that are dependent on the number of individuals that are in that area. Competition is one example. Shortages of food is another example. Nesting sites. It depends how many people are in that area for this to limit a population. On the other hand, an individual's chance of surviving or reproducing depends on the number of individuals in the same area. The opposite one is going to be density independent. Density independent does not matter. It doesn't matter how many people are in that area. It's going to affect every single person the same. And this is usually weather related. Floods, fire, examples. It reduces the population by the same proportion, regardless or independent of the population size. Okay, last one is population fluctuations. All populations are going to fluctuate in size. And you can see here's an example. The famous example in bio is the snowshoe hare and lynx. As you can see, the populations kind of mimic each other. Some populations fluctuate based on environmental changes. Some are more complicated, like this one. Small populations. Rapidly growing human population has caused extreme reductions in the populations of certain species. When we destroy habitats and when we hunt, that's going to reduce populations, and they could get really small. Small populations are vulnerable to extinction. This can also be caused by environmental disturbances such as storms, fires, floods, and diseases. Small populations tend to have low genetic diversity, and they're subject to inbreeding, and they're less likely to adapt to environmental changes. And that finishes podcast section 2 for chapter 19.